This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So, Creepshow Joe Biden sat down with Chris Cuomo. Not exactly Frost Nixon, those two. Holy cow.
It was so insufferable.
What a couple of dopes. Joe Biden on what happens if Trump's reelected vis-a-vis NATO.
If he wins re-election, I promise you, there'll be no NATO in 4 years.
No NATO.
Or 5 years.
You think there'll be no more NATO if he's reelected?
No more NATO.
No more
Serious.
NATO for you.
No more NATO. NATO's going to go away because, I don't know, because he's offended the allies who are now paying more of their...
Which they should.
To support NATO appropriately.
Weren't we supporting it 70% of the budget of NATO? I mean, so good for President Trump.
I don't know. I mean, I guess, that combined with what the British ambassador to D.C. had said about Donald Trump, some cables that were released, maybe it's all breaking apart. That's Joe Biden's contention. Here's another one. That Russian interference in our elections? Mm-hmm. That would never happen on the watch of a Joe Biden.
Oh, sure it wouldn't. No opposition research at all from any country if he's there.
Well, point of order, Joe.
Yes.
If we all agree the Russians interfered in the 2016 election, who was the president and vice president in 2016? So it already did happen on your watch.
Look at what's happening with Putin. While Putin is trying to undo our elections, he is undoing elections in Europe. Look what's happened in Hungary. Look what's happened in Poland. Look what's happened in Moldova. Look what's happening. You think that would have happened on my watch or Barack's watch? You can't answer that, but I promise you it wouldn't have. And it didn't.
It did.
It would, and it did. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Jim Carafano. He is the lieutenant colonel. He is an Army veteran. He's vice president of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation, author of books including Surviving the End and Wiki at War. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, it's good to be with you.
So if Trump gets reelected, no more NATO?
I do policy, not politics.
Well,
so
what do you think the likelihood of NATO going away is, regardless of who the next president is?
I think zero. Look, I mean, the other countries in NATO just invested another $100 billion in the alliance, and I spent a lot of time talking to the Europeans. I've been over there a number of times. We have delegations come here all the time, parliamentary delegations, ministers. I've yet to ever have a European come to me and say, we don't need NATO. And I've never had anybody who's actually in government, a real official in a serious conversation, express any real concern about the United States' commitment to NATO.
Now, as a member of the
Sure.
military, I wanted to know what you thought of Trump's 4th of July celebration. Did you think it was a misuse of the military, or do you think that was appropriate?
Well, you have to be honest. I went to West Point, and like every week we did a parade. And
but did you do parades with weapons?
Yeah. We had M14s, and we did parades, and we had stuff flying overhead, and I even did a couple of the parades in New York City. When the cadets would go down and march in those parades, and we had weapons then too. And I always hated parades, so I'm a little biased into. But on the flip side of that, I think, to be honest, if there was ever a moment where I think, we rhetorically jumped the shark in the United States, I think this was it. People wanted to complain that somehow this was a campaign thing. Well, look, every president that was ever up for re-election, you could claim that virtually any public thing they did was a campaign thing. So that, I think, on its face is not a supportable claim. And then somehow claim that this is some kind of militarism or authoritarianism. All I could think of was, the kids that move those tanks around and armored personal carriers, they are like 20 years old. They're volunteers. They signed up for only one purpose, which was to serve their country. I'm not sure they appreciated being called symbols of authoritarianism, and somehow there was some kind of equivalency between a tank being displayed on the mall, which, by the way, we've done before, and the tanks rolling down Chinese protesters in Tiananmen Square. So I just think if ever, we, stabbed civil society in the heart, and just here's, I think, look, when your morality is shaped by your politics, I think then morality ceases to inform our politics anymore. And I think we saw some of that.
I wanted to see 13 ladies dressed up like Betsy Ross carrying the original flag. That would have been cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I get that, but I think, to be honest, I mean, again, not a partisan comment because I don't do politics. I work on a nonpartisan foundation. What do people take away from this? And I think people outside the bubble of the heated rhetorical debate just look at this and they just say, well, this is just silliness. If you look at the crying baby balloon, do they say, oh my God, our president is such an embarrassment? Or do they say, how can I take these people seriously if the depth of their criticism is to put out a balloon with a crying baby on it?
Yeah. There seemed to be a lot of people on the mall that were quite interested and enjoyed this show of authoritarianism, to hear the left describe it. But the other fun part about the criticisms, to me, this is always the most fun, is when spendthrifts turn into fiscal hawks. The money that we're wasting, Jim, $2 million. $2 million, Jim. Think about what we could have done with $2 million. How we could have, frittered it away in so many other more creative ways.
Well, the logical extension of that is, why do we do flyovers at the Super Bowl?
Absolutely.
Why do we even have the Thunderbirds or the other aerial demonstration groups to begin with? So again, it's kind of strange credulity, and I think average Americans just get that. I mean, so I think the 4th of July didn't move the boat. Actually, to be honest, and my wife said this, and we recently got married. She moved back to Washington. She goes, I was a little embarrassed by the 4th of July. I said, they would have these kind of third-rate actors, and Brian Wilson for the 87th time, on these kind of cheesy shows. And she goes, is that the best America can do to celebrate its birthday? Like, where's the president? Isn't it, like, shouldn't the president say something about the nation on the 4th of July? So I actually think rather than kind of being over the top, it maybe took us back to a level of celebration that we kind of ought to be at.
Yeah, but I mean, again, just that $2 million. I mean, we could have done something really patriotic with that money, like use it to increase congressional salaries. So yeah, I mean, it's just a missed opportunity. All right, how about comment on this? British ambassador to the United States, some cables that he authored that were unearthed and are very critical of President Trump, describing him and his White House as uniquely dysfunctional and suggesting that his career could end in disgrace and so on and so forth. Now some other envoy from the UK is going to apologize to Ivanka for the contents of those cables today. What, if anything, are we to make about all of this?
Do we actually know when the cables were written? I didn't see that in the press conference.
They span the period of 2017 to the present, so it's not specifically with each comment that was referenced, but some are early in, though, June of 2017 and so forth.
Yeah, and I think that makes a difference. I mean, look, one of the things we do is we talk a lot with the international community in Washington D.C. and embassies, and there was a lot of confusion and consternation early on, and so some of that reporting from almost any delegation I could have seen in early 2017. If it's more recent, then that doesn't really kind of fit with what I hear from the international community, where I think are actually much more get Trump than they did 2 years ago. I will say that the British embassy has never actually really warmed up to this administration. I think that's just kind of true. And I think the timing on these leaks is interesting because we're much more likely to get a new British prime minister that is much more in sync with the foreign policy of this administration.
Boris
and
Johnson.
So obviously
right?
somebody is trying to just kind of throw a monkey wrench in that.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I mean, talk to us about what a Boris Johnson will mean for that relationship in the United States.
Well, I think clearly on Iran, I think will be the big issue where we'll really see the British move much more closely to the American position. I think that's a huge, real game changer. It really kind of undercuts the entire European position. I think on a whole range of it, should be really interesting to see how the British position shifts on China. So I think, I think that's healthy for Europe. I think the problem before is European policy, even if you like the EU, is really reduced to the lowest common denominator because it's what all the countries can agree with. And in a way that really kind of muffled the British voice, which I think is because they have actually the largest and most effective military in Western Europe. They have a unique strategic position, and they have unique global linkages. Kind of suppressing the British voice on foreign policy, I didn't think was healthy for Europe or for the transatlantic community. And I think one of the advantages of a Britain outside the EU with a more independent foreign policy is it'll actually be a healthier bridge between the United States and European views on security.
When you say that the diplomats and others that you speak with have sort of figured Trump out a few years in now, are you saying they understand? Because here's what I see with Trump. They understand that where he is unrestrained rhetorically, he is quite restrained in terms of his action. So he may be unrestrained rhetorically in the direction of Iran, but he is very particular and thoughtful and restrained when it comes to actually taking substantive steps.
Well, I mean, I think what they've learned is essentially not to take the rhetoric at face value, that they understand the president says many things publicly for lots of different reasons, and it just react literally to what he said isn't really the most helpful for them or for the advice they give back to their governments. So what I recommend, and I've seen many Europeans and many embassies do this, is look, let's understand the policy. And then once we understand the policy of the United States, then we can put the president's rhetoric in context and then report that back to our governments, and that makes a lot more sense.
All right. He is Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, U.S. Army vet, Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation, author of books including Surviving the End and Wiki at War. Jim, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good talking to you.
Take care.
And he joined us on our turnkey .pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.